You've felt it before. You're in a conversation, and halfway through explaining something, you can see it. The other person's eyes glaze over. They nod, they say, yeah, totally, but they're not following. And for a second, you think, is it me? Am I explaining this wrong? Here's what's actually happening.
Researchers who study high intelligence have identified something they call the complexity gap. It's not that smart people explain things badly, it's that their brains make connections so fast they skip steps that seem obvious to them but aren't obvious to anyone else. You're not being arrogant. You're not being confusing on purpose. Your brain is just running at a different speed. And today, we're going to look at 5 signs that this is exactly what's happening to you. First, let's talk about what intelligence actually is, because most people have it wrong. IQ tests measure one narrow slice of cognitive ability: pattern recognition, processing speed, working memory. But psychologists like Howard Gardner have argued for decades that there are multiple types of intelligence: linguistic, logical, spatial, emotional, creative. And here's the part nobody talks about. People who score very high in any of these areas often feel more isolated, not less. A study published in the British Journal of Psychology found that highly intelligent people actually reported lower life satisfaction the more time they spent socializing. Not because they're antisocial, but because most social interactions don't stimulate them enough. They leave conversations feeling empty, like they just ate a meal that had no nutritional value.
Sign 1. You ask questions that make people uncomfortable. Not rude questions, not offensive ones, but questions that go one level deeper than everyone else is willing to go. Why do we actually celebrate that? Who decided this was the right way to do things? Has anyone checked if this actually works? Highly intelligent people have what psychologists call tolerance for ambiguity. Most people want clean answers, quick closure, a neat resolution. But people with high cognitive ability are comfortable sitting in uncertainty. In fact, they prefer it. They'd rather have a complicated truth than a simple lie. And that can feel threatening to the people around them. Because when you ask the deeper question, you're implying that nobody asked it before. And sometimes, nobody did.
Sign 2. You have a hard time making simple decisions, but you're excellent in a crisis. This one surprises people. You'd think that being smart would make decisions easier. More data, better outcome, right? But research from Columbia University found the opposite. The more intelligent a person is, the more they tend to consider multiple outcomes simultaneously, which means ordering from a menu takes forever. Choosing a movie? Paralysis. But put that same person in a real emergency, a crisis with actual stakes, and suddenly they're calm, they're focused. They see the path forward before anyone else does. Because now the decision matters. The brain engages fully. This is why so many highly intelligent people feel like they're functioning below their potential most of the time, and then suddenly come alive when everything falls apart.
Sign 3. You'll learn to hide how much you know. At some point, probably early in your life, you noticed something. When you knew the answer too fast, people got weird. When you corrected a mistake, it didn't go well. When you got excited about something you'd learned, the room got quiet. So you started managing it. You'd wait a few seconds before answering. You'd phrase things as questions instead of statements. You downplay what you know. Psychologists call this intellectual code switching. It's exhausting, and it leads to something called gifted adult syndrome. A pattern where highly intelligent adults chronically underperform because they've spent years learning to make themselves smaller. They've gotten so good at hiding their intelligence that they've started to doubt it themselves.
Sign 4. You're incredibly hard on yourself. Most people assume that smart people are confident, that they walk into rooms knowing they're the smartest person there. But the research says something very different. The Dunning-Kruger effect, one of the most replicated findings in psychology, shows that people with low ability tend to overestimate their competence, while people with high ability tend to underestimate it. In other words, the smarter you are, the more aware you are of everything you don't know. And the more you know about how complex something truly is, the more inadequate you feel when you can't master it perfectly. This is why highly intelligent people often struggle with imposter syndrome more than average, not less, more, because their internal standard is set so high based on their actual understanding of excellence that they almost never feel like they've reached it.
Sign 5. You feel like you've never quite fit in. Anywhere. Not just in school, not just at work. Everywhere. You've had friends, you've been liked, you've functioned fine, but there's almost always been a background hum of, I don't quite belong here. Psychologist Lita Hollingworth studied children with IQs above 180 back in the 1930s. She found that children with very high intelligence had enormous difficulty finding intellectual peers. Not because they were difficult people, but because the pool of people who could match their thinking was simply very small. And that hasn't changed.
Hollingworth described these children as fundamentally lonely, not by choice, but by statistics. There just aren't that many people thinking at that level. And if this resonates with you, if you've spent your life feeling like you were always translating yourself for other people, that's not a personality flaw. That's what intellectual isolation actually feels like from the inside.
Here's the twist nobody wants to hear. High intelligence is not a superpower. It doesn't come with happiness included. Studies consistently show that above a certain threshold, around an IQ of 120, additional intelligence stops correlating with greater life satisfaction. In fact, some research suggests it starts going the other way. You see problems other people don't see yet. You understand risks before they've materialized. You feel the weight of complexity that other people walk past without noticing. Being very smart can feel, a lot of the time, like being awake in a room full of people who are asleep. And you can't decide if you want to wake them up or just let them rest. So what does this all add up to? If you recognized yourself in these signs, here's what's actually true. Your brain is not broken. Your social life is not broken. You've been operating in environments that weren't built for the way you think, and the discomfort you felt, the isolation, the exhaustion, the constant sense of not quite fitting, that's not weakness. That's what happens when a high-resolution mind tries to run on low-resolution settings. The most useful thing you can do with this information is one thing. Stop trying to simplify yourself for everyone. Find one or two people, just one or two, who don't make you feel like you need to translate. You don't need a crowd. You never did. You need depth. A few real conversations that actually go somewhere. That's it. That's the whole thing.